Started here. Great. Well, welcome everyone. We're so pleased you're able to join us today for the Home Sweet Home Addressing Hoarding webinar. We are excited to share information with everyone and have some dialogue around these topics. If anybody needs closed captioning, there is a button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Go ahead and find that if you need that closed captioning feature. If you need assistance with that, feel free to send a private chat to Lauren, and I'll be introducing her in just a minute here, and she can help you navigate for that closed captioning feature. My name is Sara Croymans. My photo's there on the right-hand side. I'm an extension educator here in Minnesota in our family resiliency area. And with me today, I'm so excited to have Axton Betz-Hamilton with us. She's an assistant professor at South Dakota State University. And so we're pleased to be the co-presenters for our workshop today, or our webinar. So what are we gonna learn about, and what are we gonna have a conversation about? So we're gonna talk about the connections between health, well-being, and the home environment. We're gonna look at how compulsive hoarding impacts one's financial, emotional, and physical well-being. And we'll discuss some strategies and resources to address hoarding. Those of you that were in that first group of 100 that signed up for the webinar, you would have received an email from me asking for your mail-in address, and you will receive a copy of this booklet. It's a book. And so be watching in your mail. Lauren is working on getting those sent out to folks. If you did get that email, I think there was a small handful of folks I hadn't gotten addresses from yet, so send those to me. But if those of you that were not in that first 100 registrations, definitely you can check out this book, see if your local library or bookstore has that. We were able to provide this book through funding from the National Healthy Homes Partnership. Did I get that right, Axton?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. I always struggle on that one, and I didn't write it down. But so we wanted to acknowledge that organization for providing funding for us to provide that book. Whoops. Let me go back. Here we go. I'm just getting happy with this little clicker here today. And I think I missed Lauren's slide. I'm supposed to have a slide for Lauren in here. There we go. Lauren is serving as our webinar producer. She's one of our regional support staff here in Extension, and she's helping with tech issues. She's going to help us monitor the chat box. She's going to be throwing some links in. But if you have any tech issues or technical questions, you can private message Lauren on the in the chat box. Otherwise, feel free to connect and chat with everyone. We will have some key discussion questions throughout the webinar. And when you do your chat, just make sure that you are emailing everyone so everyone can see that. All right. I am going to pass this off to Axton now.
Okay. Well, before I dive into the content, I just want to add a little bit more about the book. So you'll actually be receiving the book from me. So you'll see that arrive hopefully within the next week in an envelope that comes from me. So if you wonder why you're getting something from South Dakota State, it's the book. And if you are not one of the first 100 registrants for the webinar, I did check out the price of the book on Amazon. It is available there. It's just under $12. So as far as books go, that's relatively inexpensive. So if you want to purchase the book, if your library doesn't have it, it is available on Amazon. So regarding the presentation today, we're going to say the phrase "your home" quite a bit. And when we think of home, generally the mental picture we have is a single family detached dwelling, like what is here in the picture. But Home can be an apartment, a mobile home, a condominium. If you're a college student, I know we have some college students joining us today, it could be your residence hall room. So it's wherever you live. So when we say your home, we mean where you are currently living. So this resource here was produced by the National Healthy Homes Partnership. It's called Everyone Deserves a Safe and Healthy Home. It is available for free on the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development website. The link is down here. You will be receiving a copy of these slides, so don't worry about trying to write down this very long URL. You will get that link from Sara in a follow-up email. But this publication covers all aspects of healthy homes. And we're going to get into the principles of healthy homes on the next slide, I believe. But this booklet is full of tips and advice on how to make your home a healthy home. So the 8 principles of healthy homes. First is to keep it dry, clean, safe, well ventilated, pest free, contaminant free, maintained, and thermally controlled. So when we think of compulsive hoarding in relationship to healthy homes, compulsive hoarding can impact one's ability to keep their home dry, keep it clean, keep it safe, keep it well ventilated, keep it pest free, keep it contaminant free, and keep it well maintained. So engaging in compulsive hoarding definitely has the ability to have a negative impact on our ability to keep our home healthy on 7 of the 8 principles of healthy homes. So while we often think of compulsive hoarding in the context of mental health, it's also a housing issue. So a healthy home is one that is designed, constructed, maintained, or rehabilitated in a manner that prevents diseases and injuries that result from housing-related hazards. So now I'd like everyone to take a moment and go into the chat and, in your own words, describe the difference between a collector and a hoarder. So see organization, curation. Collections are well organized, enjoyment. Hoarding brings on safety issues, organization. I'm seeing a theme here with organization. Safety. So I'm seeing the word safety in several of these. Collections don't obstruct living areas. Discriminating between what's important versus struggling with what to hold on to.
I like that word purpose as well.
Yeah, collector acquires with a purpose. Okay, so it seems like the chat is starting to slow down a bit, so I'll go ahead and move on to the definition. So we're going to give you the correct answers to what is a collector and what is a hoarder. So collectors, as many of you said, deliberately search out specific items, categorize them or organize them. Many of you use the word organize, and carefully display their collections. Compulsive hoarding or hoarding disorder is when an individual has a persistent difficulty in discarding or parting with possessions because of a perceived need to save them. And several of you who commented on hoarding talked about most of these concepts. So, largely you are on target with describing collecting versus hoarding. So, people who struggle with compulsive hoarding or have a diagnosis of hoarding disorder often experience other mental health disorders at the same time, such as depression, anxiety disorders, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and obsessive compulsive personality disorder, which you might be thinking, wait a minute, didn't you just say the same thing? I didn't. So, obsessive compulsive disorder and obsessive compulsive personality disorder are two different things, even though they sound incredibly similar. So, obsessive compulsive disorder is characterized by intrusive thoughts or compulsions, and it's linked with anxiety. So, you think of someone who has to check, X number of times that they turn their stove off, and they can't leave the house or do whatever else it is that they want to do until they do that checking X number of times. Obsessive compulsive personality disorder, however, is characterized by a rigid or perfectionistic personality uh, or personality characteristics. With regard to financial management, they have a miserly spending style. So they have difficulty spending money on themselves or others, even for basic needs. And they feel that money is something that needs to be hoarded for future catastrophes. So there's like this sense of, impending doom, that there's something bad is always going to happen, and I need to be prepared for when something bad happens because it's going to happen. So, um, this hoarding disorder questionnaire comes from a resource that I'll share a little bit later in the presentation, called Facilitating Financial Health by Clontz, Kaler, and Clontz. Several of you said in the chat that you are accredited financial counselors. I know there are some folks who are interested in the webinar who are in the financial therapy space. And so the book Facilitating Financial Health is used by professionals in both areas. So you may be familiar with it. This questionnaire is not designed to be a diagnostic tool. So as financial counselors, as financial therapists, we can't diagnose. We're not licensed clinicians. But Clontz, Kaler, and Clontz developed this questionnaire as more of a self-assessment tool and a tool that you could use with clients to help them assess the potential of them having hoarding disorder and be able to make an appropriate referral to a clinician. So the questions here: are you unable to throw things away, even if they are only of limited value? Is your living space cluttered with items that you do not use on a regular basis? Does throwing something away make you feel like you are losing a part of yourself? Do possessions provide you with feelings of safety or security? Do you worry that if you put your things away, you might lose track of them when you need them? And I'm not going to read all 10, but how this questionnaire is designed is that the more yes responses you have, the more likely it is that you have hoarding disorder and need to be referred to a clinician. So signs and symptoms of hoarding disorder are excessively acquiring items that are not needed or for which there is no space, persistent difficulty in throwing out or parting with items regardless of actual value, and feeling a need to save items and being upset by the thought of discarding them. So several things that you all hit on in the chat about collecting versus hoarding. Other signs and symptoms: building up clutter to the point where rooms become unusable, and having a tendency towards indecisiveness, perfectionism, avoidance, procrastination, and problems with planning and organizing, which I'll get into a little bit more later in the webinar.
When Axton, it's my understanding too that those signs and symptoms typically start to surface during the teenage and early adult years. And then as the person grows older, they may start acquiring things again that have no immediate need for or space. And by middle age, then those symptoms can become severe and maybe harder to manage or deal with.
Absolutely.
Yep, thinking about that timeline piece.
So with regard to relationships, people who hoard usually have very few meaningful relationships, and the relationships they do have, they've had for a long time. So I think at this point I'm supposed to turn things over to Sara, and I'll be back a little bit later to provide more information on some hot topics like hoarding of animals.
Great, thanks, Axton. So, if someone excessively acquires or refuses to discard items, that could result in a variety of things, and we have those listed here. And probably the top one is the one that we oftentimes think of when we think about hoarding. Those disorganized piles or stacks of items. So those visuals that we see on the TV shows or that jump to our mind. Again, those possessions that crowd or clutter the walking spaces, making space unusable for those intended purposes. So our things on the dining room table are the couch and the living area, or even the bathtub might be full of stuff. So we're not able to use the spaces as intended. The buildup of food or trash to unusually excessive or unsanitary levels. And this goes back to what Axton was speaking about earlier on a healthy home. So we know if we have a lot of trash, we might be inviting pests and rodents and different things. Again, significant distress or problems functioning or keeping oneself or others safe in the home. Conflict with others who are trying to reduce or remove that clutter, and difficulty organizing items, or sometimes losing important items in the clutter are some of those things that happen. So another chat opportunity here. Why do you think people with a hoarding disorder save items? Emily, thank you for sharing in the chat about the difficulty getting rid of your mom's items. Yeah. So why do you think people with a hoarding disorder save items? Fear. Tara, what's the fear of? Security, safety, security, trauma, right? We're hearing more about trauma these days and how that plays out. Memories, right? Memories attached to the items. Some items, yes, that think they need them but don't want to spend money on them in the future. So perhaps emotional attachment. Fear of loss. Thanks, Daniel. Guilt, afraid they'll need something. Worry if they give it away, they'll need it later. Provides a sense of control, attachment to items. Sentiment and memories, definitely on some items, but sometimes people would hoard items that have no purpose, right? Old newspapers, perhaps. Don't want to have to buy it again. Emotional attachment, memories again. Yeah, don't know where to start when cleaning things out. Yeah. Unresolved sense of loss, grief from loss of loved ones, relationships, confusion. What do I do with all of this? Yeah. Oh, Brandon, I'm connected there. Brandon's saying I have an intention to use it for a project, right? I've got a lot of projects in waiting for sure. You want to keep things out of the landfill, hard to let go. Thank you for sharing those items. Keep them coming if you have additional thoughts on that. So we're going to watch just a short video here on why people with hoarding disorders hang on to objects.
So all of us enjoy having objects. They bring meaning and joy to our life. Individuals with hoarding disorder are no different from all of us. We have three main reasons that we keep objects. So one is sentimentality, something that reminds you of a happy time or a loved one. The second is the aesthetics. Walking along the beach and seeing a beautiful seashell, you want to take it home and remember the beauty of the day and the object. And the other is the usefulness. So I don't want to throw this away. It could come in handy someday. Now, individuals with hoarding disorder have these same reasons, but they're magnified. So objects may have all three of these reasons, or the feelings may be more intense. And that's really where the attachment comes in and the difficulty parting with objects. Individuals with hoarding disorder are very creative, and they can come up with lots of uses for a particular object. And we've had clients where something as simple as a toilet paper roll, they could use it for binoculars for a child's science fair project. It could be donated to a local school. An art project could be made out of it. However, one of the differences that distinguishes an artist versus somebody with hoarding disorder is that those ideas are not fulfilled and realized. So when you ask somebody with hoarding disorder, they don't have plans to donate it to a school. They don't have plans to make an object. They may have plans, but they don't actually execute on that. One of the things I would say about hoarding disorder is that it stems from some characteristics deep within us as human beings that are actually positive. So wanting to be conserving resources, and throughout the evolution of man, it's been important in times of relatively few resources to gather resources, and it's been very adaptive. But as time has gone by with industrial revolution and also a lot of advertising, we get more and more pressure that taps into that fundamental need to save and conserve resources.
Excellent. I really like that short video because it clearly describes some of the why behind it. And she talked about the toilet paper rolls, right, for art projects, or are there intentions or plans with that, and just great examples. All right, so items are typically saved because people may believe those items are unique, they'll need them in the future. You guys touched on this one in the chat earlier. They may have emotional significance. People may feel safer when they're surrounded by the things that they save. And again, they don't want to waste anything. I think about the people that grew up during the Great Depression, right? They definitely may be savers and don't want to waste because you might need that down the road. Now, what about causes? It's not clear what causes a hoarding disorder. Genetics, brain functioning, maybe a stressful life event, someone talked about trauma earlier, are all being studied as possible causes of hoarding. So we have another chat opportunity here. What do you think are the risk factors of hoarding? The risk factors. Social stigma, yeah, poverty, unsafe living. Thanks, Robin, on that social stigma. Oftentimes, hoarding is kind of a private activity, right? They may not let people in their home, and so people may not know. Safety, health and safety, people growing up poor, death of a loved one, generational trauma, a risk not being able to find anything, definitely. Fear of the future, divorce might be a risk. Perfect pest environment, yeah, unfortunately. Lack of support. Oh, Evelyn, thank you. Getting to the point of no return, cleaning no longer works. The social isolation, safety, lack of that support network. Living in a mess, those unsanitary conditions, lack of purpose, right? Not just social, also wanting maintenance people in the house also, right? So people need to come in and help with the maintenance on the home as well. Oh, chaos. Marilyn, thank you. Chaos. Can't have anyone over syndrome, right? Because this is kind of a private behavior, and they keep people out of the home. Thank you for sharing those. Lots of different risk factors that could happen. Overall decreased mental health, messy environment, messy brain. Definitely. All right, I'm going to pass this on to Axton to talk us through a little bit more on some risk factors.
Okay, so you all hit on several of these risk factors. I'm going to briefly touch on age, as we touched on this a bit before, but hoarding generally tends to begin between the ages of 11 and 15 and gets worse with time. So several folks were mentioning earlier in the webinar about they've seen hoarders and they feel that it's sensationalized. And most of the folks that you see on hoarders, they're older. And the situations are extreme. And that portrayal is true in the sense that those who are older likely have more extreme hoarding behaviors. But the problem began usually earlier in life. Personality, folks with hoarding disorder generally tend to have personalities that are more indecisive. They have difficulty making decisions, which carries over to having difficulty deciding what things that they should part with and what things they should keep. They're also perfectionistic. There's typically a family history of hoarding. So if, say, a parent or grandparent struggles with hoarding, typically an individual will have a higher chance of experiencing hoarding as well. Stressful life events, which several of you mentioned in the chat, trauma. So, you know, we can react to loss by holding on to things that give us comfort. And I saw in the chat someone mentioned struggling with parting with possessions that belonged to a parent after they passed away. And there could be grief enveloped into the hoarding behaviors as well. In situations like that, it's really important to seek the help of a clinician. Social isolation, which we mentioned before, and financial anxiety. So several of you mentioned in the chat or individuals with hoarding struggling with not having enough resources, or maybe going through a period in life where they didn't have enough resources. And Sara mentioned folks who lived through the Great Depression and their tendency to hold on to things because they've experienced life without things that those of us who didn't go through the Depression can take for granted. For example, I remember my grandfather, who was in college during the Depression, he washed aluminum foil and reused it. And I remember as a little girl asking, why don't you just throw that away? And he explained that he went through a time where, things like aluminum foil were a luxury. So it's just a habit that was born out of that traumatic experience. And so struggling with letting go of possessions can be the result of a traumatic experience. And that traumatic experience could be related to not having enough resources at some point in life. And then I think I mentioned financial anxiety. So again, not having enough resources and not knowing how you're going to pay your bills or replace things when they break, that can be a source of hoarding as well as a compensatory strategy for dealing with financial anxiety. So complications of hoarding, increased risk of falls because of things in your house that you may trip over and fall. And this is really an issue for older adults who have physical limitations, and they may be in a position where if they trip and fall, they may have difficulty getting back up or getting to a phone to call for help. Injury or being trapped by shifting or falling items. Family conflicts between the individual experiencing hoarding and family members who want to intervene and want them to start parting with possessions and want them to be in a position where they can better maintain their home. Loneliness and social isolation, which we talked about quite a bit already. Unsanitary conditions that pose a risk to health. There are cases of hoarders that will hold on to food. So they'll hoard food, and that could be because they went through a period of time where they experienced food insecurity, and that food goes bad, and that can contribute to unsanitary conditions. Hoarding can interfere with daily tasks such as bathing or cooking, particularly if items that are hoarded are like stored in the bathtub or stored on the stove. Hoarding can be a fire hazard. It can lead to poor work performance, which we have a slide on that coming up. Legal issues such as eviction, if you're renting, and as we mentioned before, financial stress. So regarding the impacts of hoarding on work, these folks tend to have a poor sense of time, which can lead to time management problems, which can lead to tasks not getting done in the workplace, which can lead to disciplinary action by one's employer. They often misplace files, they're tardy or absent frequently. They may be late simply because they misplaced their keys and can't find them, and they're running around the house trying to find their keys so they can get to work on time. They can't do it, and they end up being late and getting in trouble. They tend to struggle with instructions. They have difficulty making decisions. So going back to that indecisiveness that is common with compulsive hoarding. They may miss important work deadlines and have reduced productivity. So hoarding animals. So this is kind of a unique dimension or manifestation of hoarding. And an individual may collect dozens or even hundreds of pets. And typically individuals who do this do it out of a good place. You know, it's not because they want to have too many animals and not be able to take care of them. It's because they want to help the animals. And also, we mentioned before that those who engage in hoarding tend to experience social isolation. They're embarrassed about inviting people over to their home because of the clutter and perhaps unsanitary conditions. And animals are generally more forgiving of those things. Animals tend to offer us unconditional acceptance no matter what kind of day we've had or how we're feeling. Animals love us. I have a cat who, no matter how my day has gone, I know she's going to meet me at the garage door when I come home from work. And that, that's part of that unconditional acceptance and that consistency that's so important that those who engage in compulsive hoarding may be lacking. Unfortunately, with hoarding animals, again, the animals often aren't cared for properly just because there are so many of them, and maybe the individual who is hoarding animals doesn't have the financial resources to get the animals veterinary care, to get them proper food, etc. And the health and safety of the individual and the animals are at risk. So our next question that we'd like you to respond to in the chat is, how would you help someone who is engaging in hoarding? So go ahead and type your answers in the chat.
And Axton, while we're waiting for people to share that, I did want to point out Brandon had a question or a comment on, is the collecting of unachieved professional personal goals considered a form of hoarding, even if no physical objects are involved, having more and more ideas of things to do and not strategically letting go of old ideas or unrealized dreams? Any thoughts on that?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't think it meets the clinical definition of hoarding. That to me sounds like it could be related to like challenges with focusing and prioritizing, and it may be related to maybe some attention deficit issues, but it doesn't sound like it meets the clinical definition of hoarding.
Great, thanks. So lots of good ideas coming through on how to help someone.
So digital hoarding, would you feel comfortable, the person who just typed that, typing what you mean by digital hoarding? Because I could see that meaning multiple things.
So people are providing lots of ideas here. Sit with people through their anxiety. offer to help tackle a corner, listen to their concerns, be curious and listen, be non-judgmental, ask them how they feel about their situation. Non-judgment is mentioned several times. Try to understand why they can't throw things out or why they are holding on to items.
So someone mentioned that they don't get rid of emails. If you don't get rid of work emails, I think that can actually be a good strategy, because there may be something that comes up in the workplace in the future where you wish you had that email. In fact, this happened to me at work just the other day where my supervisor reminded me of an email that I had sent, I think, a year ago. And she said, do you remember that email? Do you remember what you said? And I said, I think I can find it and forward it to you. And I don't get rid of emails either, especially work-related emails. And I was able to find that email, and it was actually useful for another workplace situation that's going on right now. So holding on to emails, particularly work emails, can actually be a good strategy.
One suggestion says to let people know that you care, right? And they may be more willing to accept help if that's the case. How to begin that hoarding conversation? That's a big question.
Yes, don't push or throw things out for them. Yes, that is one of the correct answers that we're going to talk about. Yes. Pushing someone to throw out items, that can really backfire.
What great discussion.
Okay, well, if you have more thoughts that you want to share in the chat, feel free to, but since the chat's slowing down, I'll go ahead and move to the next slide. So as I just mentioned, the worst thing to do is to go into the individual's home and clean it up for them. Like, I've heard of individuals who intervene with a family member who's struggling with hoarding by having one family member take them out for the day, going to the park, going out to eat, whatever that they're doing, having a fun day, while another family member stays home and just pitches stuff and cleans, and they think they're doing the right thing. It is actually one of the worst things that you can do, because what will happen is that will create anxiety in that individual who is struggling with hoarding when they come home and see that a lot of their possessions are gone. And the individual who is suffering from hoarding, they'll fall back into that pattern, and it might actually become worse because it can be traumatic for them to come home and see that their possessions are gone. So do not use this strategy. So strategies to help, some of these, actually probably a lot of these, I think were in the chat. So be patient. I think that goes along with showing that you care, that someone mentioned. Emphasize that the person is more important than the clutter. And I think this is a really critical point, where the individual is more than their clutter. And sometimes as individuals who don't struggle with compulsive hoarding, we have difficulty separating the clutter from the person. We say things like, you're a hoarder, you need to get rid of this stuff. And they're not hoarders, they're individuals who are struggling with compulsive hoarding. So they have a problem, but they are not their problem. Keep communication open. Some of you mentioned that in various ways. Listen without judgment. Treat the person with respect and dignity. Focus on the person's good qualities, again, that they're more than their disorder. Recognize small steps of progress. And I think this is really important. So I um, used to have a neighbor who struggled with hoarding, and she lived in the same apartment complex I did. So she lived above me, I lived downstairs. And we were having a apartment-wide yard sale. So the whole complex was getting together. We were going to do this yard sale. And myself and another neighbor really encouraged our neighbor who was struggling to identify 3 small items to put in the yard sale. And she was in a position where the money would have benefited her. And I said, I was standing there with my other neighbor. I said, we don't need to know right now what items. And she agreed to. She said, okay, I could do 3 small items. I said, you don't need to choose them right now. I said, well, we're setting up for the yard sale tomorrow. If you want to just put them out in the hallway tonight, I'll get them first thing in the morning. Because I thought it might have been difficult for her to see me take the items outside and price them and then see people take them away. I said, I'll put what you want in the hallway and I'll take care of it. And I had gone outside of my apartment later that night to, grab my laundry or something. And I saw there were 3 small items that were sitting outside her door in the hallway. I thought, yes, she did it. This is great. Then I went upstairs the next morning and they were all back inside. She couldn't do it. But, if someone is able to get rid of, even one small item, if it's if they have a tendency to hoard newspapers and they can get rid of one newspaper, a week, praise that. Even though to a lot of individuals that may seem incredibly small, especially in relation to the, overall scheme of the hoarding problem, praising small steps matters. Help shape decisions, don't make them. Some of you mentioned that in the chat. Create a support system, because again, individuals who struggle with hoarding, they're socially isolated. So they need that acceptance. They need that support. And then seek community resources. And I'll get into community resources on the next couple of slides. So talk with a doctor or mental health professional as soon as possible, as long as the individual who is struggling is willing to accept that. Seek community agencies that help with hoarding problems. And I saw from the chat that there are some folks who are affiliated with agencies that do such work. Contact local authorities such as police, fire, public health, child or adult protective services, or animal welfare agencies if the situation is an extreme one where there really is a safety issue. So potential community resources, I mentioned doctor, I also mentioned mental health professionals. I put financial therapists here kind of under mental health professionals because financial therapists are trained in mental health as well as financial health. So individuals who are struggling with hoarding may benefit from the services of someone who can address both issues. However, financial therapists are not licensed clinicians, so they can't diagnose. I mentioned before, police, fire, public health, child or adult protective services. If there's a significant health or safety issue resulting from the hoarding, animal welfare agencies if there's hoarding of animals that's occurring, and support groups. So with regard to prevention, there's no known way to prevent compulsive hoarding. However, early intervention may prevent hoarding from becoming worse. So we mentioned earlier that hoarding behaviors tend to start between the ages of 11 and 15 and get worse over time. If there were early interventions, say with that 11 to 15-year-old age group that was demonstrating signs of hoarding, it may prevent the problem from escalating to severe situations like are depicted on the TV show Hoarders. So references, here on the left is a picture of the textbook Facilitating Financial Health. If you are a professional in this area, particularly if you're an AFC or you're in the financial therapy space, This book is very practical, so it's not theoretical at all, and it's full of questionnaires and different tools that you can use with clients to help them. We've got a link here to the Mayo Clinic's website on hoarding disorder. We've got a link to an AARP article, a link to the Facilitating Financial Health book. It's a little pricey because it is used as a textbook. And then a link to an extension publication from K-State Extension on hoarding. And now I will turn things over to Sara to wrap up the webinar.
Great, great. Well, I do want to pause just a moment here. If there are any specific questions or additional things folks would like to share in the chat box, definitely go ahead and add those here. Axton and I truly are not experts on hoarding. We've got some basic information that we're sharing with you, but definitely continue to put things in the chat box if you have things that you want to share. All of you received a pre-assessment. I sent that out to your emails yesterday morning. We ask that you complete a post-assessment, and this is because we did receive the funding from the National Healthy Homes Partnership for the books, so that we can document increased knowledge or not from participating in the webinar. And so we'll include that link in the follow-up email as well. Lauren has put that in the chat. Thank you so much, Lauren, for doing that. If anybody needs a certificate of participation, send me an email, croym001@umn.edu. And that'll be in the follow-up email as well. I can share a certificate of participation if you need that. Those of you that might be University of Minnesota employees or spouses and you want to get some well-being points for your insurance benefits, here is the link for that. And Lauren, if you're able to put that in the chat, we will also include that in the follow-up email as well. So those are items of importance here. I do want to just share that this is the first of 38 webinars that we're hosting January through April, and we have, I believe, 7 or 8 different categories or series here. If you are a Spanish speaker, or if you have friends or colleagues, clients that are Spanish speakers, we have several webinars, talks in Spanish that are available. These links will be in your follow-up email, and so there's several webinars in each category. We have a really cool family-friendly Earth Care series, Finding Balance, so mental well-being, types of things, later life decision-making, making sense of it all, so some financial capability pieces. This webinar actually fits in our No Place Like Home series. We have a couple related to recovery and health, and then some fun ones on what's for dinner, how to feed little ones, and then looking at different nutrients, macronutrients, fiber, and different things. So we will include these links in the follow-up email, and we encourage you to check that out. You can also search for these webinars on the family development ones, and we'll include this in the follow-up email. So one link to get you to all of those webinars. And then, of course, Extension is more than just our Center for Family Development. We have educators that work in agriculture, food, natural resources, youth development, community vitality, and they offer a lot of different courses and events as well. So we'll include that link as well in the follow-up email so you can check out what is happening there. We do encourage you, or I encourage you to engage with University of Minnesota Extension on social media. There is a link here for our YouTube channel. And again, you'll have this in the follow-up email and the PowerPoint slides. But the YouTube channel is where we're going to be posting the recording for this webinar. So if you want to share it with others, definitely direct them. We take a little bit of time to get closed captioning added to that recording. So I think within a couple of weeks, we'll get that uploaded for sure. So we encourage that. I asked Axton, what do you want to share from South Dakota? And so these are all Facebook accounts or Facebook pages, correct?
Yes.
Axton? Yes.
Yes.
So I got my undergrad at SDSU, so I love the Jackrabbits, and so exciting that if anyone's from North Dakota, so sorry about the recent football game, but the Extension Food and Families, the School of Health and Consumer Sciences, and their Consumer Affairs program. So you can just go to Facebook and search for those titles or names as well. But that is the information that we have. We're done a few minutes early, but I thought we could check out these items. Axton, let's talk about donating things and what that might be like.
Sure. So with donating, and I'm putting on my financial planner hat, as I teach financial planning courses here at SDSU. But with donating items that have value, one thing to take into consideration is who owns the asset. If it is the individual who is engaging in hoarding, and they are in a position where they would benefit from a charitable donation, with regard to their tax situation, by all means do that. Places that will accept donations, they're generally more particular these days about what they want, because unfortunately people dump things that are junk, that are just not usable, because they don't want to pay to take things to the landfill. And that's just the unfortunate reality of it, whether it's a hoarding situation or not. If you happen to have ownership of the assets, and you're curious about the tax implications of that, you can donate up to certain percentages of your AGI each year, depending on what type of asset it is. So cash, you can donate up to 60% of your AGI, so your adjusted gross income. Tangible assets, so furniture, clothing, things of that nature, it's 50%. And I'm speaking federal taxes, not state taxes, because I am not an expert on Minnesota taxes at all. And here in South Dakota, we don't have state income taxes. So you want to check out those AGI limits, relative to the value of things that you want to donate. And then, of course, ownership of the assets is also going to be an issue in these situations.
Thanks for sharing that. A couple other comments or questions here in the chat as well, Axton. And what can I do if I have a family member that compulsively hoards and nobody will help us? So I'm assuming, Amy, that you've reached out to organizations, and no one's responding. I'm wondering, if it is a health concern, if that would make a difference in the response. Any other thoughts on that, Axton?
That was exactly what I was thinking, that if the situation is severe enough where there is a health issue, reaching out to the police, the fire department, public health, if it's an issue involving a vulnerable adult, contacting Adult Protective Services and having them initiate an investigation, may be helpful as well.
Great, thank you. There was another comment here. In cases where hoarding presents itself with other mental health disorders or issues such as adoption, is it beneficial to address hoarding behaviors independently or always holistically?
I would say holistically, because I think there's enough overlap in the diagnostic criteria of mental health disorders, that, for example, what may appear to be anxiety may be related to ADHD, which could be related to compulsive hoarding and the anxiety associated with that. So as someone who is not a trained clinician, I don't think that, and I'm assuming the person who asked that is not a trained clinician, I don't think you want to try and tease that out on your own. I think it needs to be addressed holistically with the help of a qualified clinician.
Thanks, Axton. Just a few more comments and then we can wrap up here too. Robin suggested that when making donations, always get that receipt for tax purposes, of course, definitely. And Rachel, thanks for helping us with that AGI acronym. And then one final comment here. How can we find where to donate or sell particular items? For instance, we served as the executors and had to deal with what could be considered as a collection of figurines. Could be antiques, could be memorabilia, etc. You know, that's really challenging for sure. You know, you have to figure out, are there antique dealers? Are there antique shops? There seems to be organizations for any type of collectors. For example, I'm a member of the Red Wing Collectors Society. So Crocs and jugs and dinnerware and artware, right? So there's a whole community of people that collect those things. Those are the people I would like to go to or would need to go to if I wanted to get rid of a collection. And so depending upon what those figurines and things are, search out, is there a community that collects those? All right, well, this chat box has stopped here. As shared earlier, we will be sending out a follow-up email. We'll include those important links for certificates in the post-eval and the UMN well-being points. You'll have all of the links that we shared, and that recording will be uploaded to our YouTube channel within a couple weeks, hopefully, as well. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you on future webinars. Have a great day.